Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We hope you're keeping very safe and well out there. Thank you as always for joining us. If you're listening to the show for the very first time, you can find us on iTunes, on Spotify, on Audio Boom, or across a range of different audio platforms. We are, of course, on Twitter at Last Word on Spurs. We're on Facebook and Instagram too. And of course, this season we're also live on YouTube. Delighted to have alongside me, I've got my co-host. I've got Jamie Brown with me from the Daily Hotspur. Jay, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Ricky. Of course, very chaotic international break. Definitely looking forward to it being over now. Just so much has gone on. Unfortunately, the Spurs not in such a good way, but I'm sure we'll cover it. And obviously, a fantastic start to the season as well. And we've got a fantastic guest on. So really looking forward to this one today.
Yeah, most certainly. Like I say, we're absolutely delighted to welcome the wonderful Tottenham Hotspur correspondent, Ali Gold himself. Ali, how are you?
Yeah, all good. All good. Like Jamie said, it's expecting a real snooze fest of an international break, but it's Tottenham Hotspur, isn't it? This is absolutely anything but. And they just find themselves in the middle of the most ridiculous situations. And of course, I then have to chuck myself into the middle of it all. And yeah, always an adventure, Tottenham Hotspur.
Just when you think, Ali, you're going to get a break, transfer window's over, you still have to report them. You just can't get a break, can you? Even in your day off, you can't get a break.
No, not a chance. Not a chance. It's deliberate. It's cruel. It's just what Spurs do. And hey, give me plenty to write about. You know, international breaks, often when you're a reporter, it's just very much, especially a club reporter, there's so little to write about. So, yeah, in one way, loads to write about, and in other, just sifting through the chaos that is Tottenham Hotspur.
Yeah, most certainly. And it's funny because obviously a lot of people are used to seeing you record with the blue background. So obviously, like I say, Gary says there, where's the blue background, Harry? You know, you've got more than one background, Ali.
It's over there.
It's over there. It's over there. It's over there. Recording at all angles, Alasdair Gold. Absolutely brilliant. Yeah. Like I say, lovely to have him here. And like I say, the Alasdair Gold fan club in full forces, Stewie says there. Absolutely delighted to have Ali join us for this show. It's fair to say that we've been chasing Ali down for the best part of a couple of months, and it's only right to give him the summer transfer window first before he comes to see us. So thank you so much for joining us. Of course, we're in the middle of an international break. Fair to say it's not been the most quietest one, which we could all hope for. There's still drama going on, which we will touch upon. But Ali, we'll start off with a question because it's lovely to have you on. We don't always get the chance to ask you these kind of questions on the Last Word on Spurs. This one came in from JB Flag of England, who says, who is Alasdair's all-time footballing hero and favourite team since supporting Spurs?
Oh, tough one, right, to start off. As a kid, because I was a bit of a striker in my day, back when I was young and in my Sunday league days, I was always about the strikers. So it was Gary Lineker, Teddy Sheringham. They were the two for me when I was young. They were absolute class. Very different strikers, but they were class. In terms of the team, it's always a funny one. I suppose as a kid, for me, probably that Venables team, that '91 Cup final team. I was pretty young, to be fair. I was about 11, 12 then. In terms of the team I've probably most enjoyed since then, it's probably the Poch era, prime Poch. You know, I think that in terms of absolute enjoyment of the football I was watching, yeah, probably maybe the year they finished second to Chelsea, probably that year. I think some of the football they played was like the best out there. Yeah, so I'd go for that. One from childhood, one from more recently as a reporter.
Okay, fantastic. We'll get some more random questions, I'm sure, coming in throughout the show. Ali's up for them, so please, like I say, feel free to drop these questions in. Ali, let's start with the positives, because it has been a real positive start to the season for Spurs. Bearing in mind the chaotic summer that Tottenham had. I do want to touch upon that as well, because Spurs, 3 straight victories in the Premier League to start the season under Nuno Espirito Santo, top of the early table. What have you made of the start, bearing in mind the craziness of a summer of 72-day search for a manager that led us in so many different directions? I mean, my God, you were writing the script, changing it up, tearing it up, rewriting it again. I don't know how many times you did that. What have you made of it?
I think it's been far better than probably most of us expected, to be honest. I think I've got to give full credit to Nuno, really. He's come into, I don't want to swear, an absolute mess of a situation. A club that was so fragmented. You could literally see the craters in that club. And I always hark back to the Hugo Lloris interview after Zagreb. just where he absolutely ripped into the club, and we've never seen him do that. That was the club that Nuno was inheriting, essentially. Backbiting, sniping players that weren't in the team that wanted to be, and were kind of undermining players that wanted to leave the club. And obviously, Nuno came in with everything that went on with Harry Kane, and obviously lots of changes above him with Paratici coming in as well. I think he's done, I'd almost go as far as say, an incredible job. I really do. It's very, very early days. So, I can't absolutely get carried away. But in terms of what he's managed to do within the space of, about 2 months, maybe 3 months in charge, the way he's pulled everyone together, I think he's done a terrific job. And, he's a really interesting character as a reporter as well.
I think one thing that struck me very much with Nuno is he's kind of seems a lot more like Mauricio Pochettino in kind of the way he manages players. I think having experienced Jose Mourinho and kind of the atmosphere that he created at the club, I feel as though Nuno has kind of really brought a very positive atmosphere to the club. So do you feel as though he's kind of the right man to kind of unify the fans around the club again?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, I've used this expression before, but my feeling has always been sometimes it isn't always the person you want that ends up being the right person. And, I think Poch is the best example of that. It really is. I'd say most people that summer probably wanted Frank de Boer, or even Van Gaal, was the one that was probably offered the job first. They ended up with Poch, and he probably was the best thing that happened to Spurs in decades. And hopefully Nuno will be the same. Everyone around the club says the same thing about him, that he's kind of somewhere in between Mourinho and Poch, and the way he deals with people, the way he is. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think Mourinho had his strengths, Poch had his strengths, both of them had their weaknesses. And if Nuno ends up bringing the best of both worlds, then great, as long as he doesn't bring the worst of both worlds. But so far, it looks like he's going to bring the best. And I say the best. To be fair to Mourinho, Mourinho's best is very, very good. Whatever you want to say about Mourinho, his best was incredible over his career. No, I'm really impressed with Nuno, and I think he's got a lot of the players on board, a lot of the staff behind the scenes really, really like him. The expression I keep hearing about him is he's a good man, and I think that's so key. And I think for Tottenham right now, that's exactly what they need. It was a good man who wants his family atmosphere, which has just been so lacking at Spurs for a while.
Now, Ali, we said we'd drop questions in throughout the show. We got one there on the screen from Emre Ortetepe. I hope I pronounced that right. Please forgive me if I haven't. He says, apart from Ndombele, as I know how much you love him, of course we do, from your YouTube, from obviously the Golden Guest pod, and he says there about the membership, of course. Who is your other current favourite Spurs player, and can you also send him a membership as well as Dele Alli, please?
Okay, I can. That'll be in the post. That'll get there, hopefully. I'll send it second class. They took Eric Lamela away from me. Eric Lamela was my other passion project at Tottenham. He wasn't always the
game. Can I say that, Ali? Only you can get away with saying that. Any other Spurs fan saying anything about Eric Lamela positively, my God, I'll tell you what, you have to go away high to say that. Only you can get away with saying that. Honestly,
you say what you like about Eric Lamela, but he gave everything for Tottenham Hotspur. He loved Tottenham. And he was one of the few players, a bit like Ndombele, that there's a bit of a risk to what he did. And I love that. That's why I kind of watch football for. And he was a dirty git as well. He really was. And that was sometimes quite fun to watch the opposition getting all wound up. But out of the current players, on a personal level, obviously, I love Sonny. Sonny, as a reporter as well, is great to interview. He's everything you imagine him to be, he is. He makes you smile, or he's fantastic. Who else we got in the team? I've got a soft spot, and everyone knows this. I've got a soft spot for Skippy, for Oliver Skipp. I've seen him come through the academy. I watched a lot of his games as a young player. And to watch him kind of go to Norwich, win the championship with them, and now coming in and, he's a Tottenham fan. He was a kid, he was in the stands as a kid, and now he's kind of living the dream that we'd all want to live. And he's also very good. He's not got there by any fluke. He is a terrific player. I'd say he's up there among my favourite players right now, and I think he can only get better, which is really exciting as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, I really do. And I think one of the interesting things has been the way that, although Spurs, I mean, it's obviously deliberately done in terms of the way they select their certain videos to go out on social media, it does seem like quite a happy camp. I know we've had a couple of reports to say, maybe it's not as such. And I heard you recently on your YouTube channel saying like anything, when a couple of players aren't in the team, of course there's going to be some negativity around. Of course there is. But have you noticed that, in terms of the players are enjoying that step up in intensity? Because I think under Mourinho, it's fair to say that maybe that intensity wasn't there as much. It does feel that the players are now being worked, and as much as they didn't maybe enjoy the Poch double training sessions, and a lot of that squad now have moved on, and there's still certain players that are still there. Have you noticed that there is a change in the squad in terms of how their approaches to the club?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was the interesting thing about Mourinho. There was very much this kind of focus on, it was all about the tactics, and the players, he felt, from what I understood, is that he felt the players should be responsible for their own fitness, essentially. That's their professionals, it's their lookout. They should be, as a bare minimum, incredibly fit. And I kind of get that. But then I think the reason that I think Poch's Spurs was so good was that they were so fit. And they were pressing like a pack of animals at times. They were just incredible. And that was even in the final minutes of games. And Nuno's come in and he's put on the double sessions. They've absolutely been flogged during pre-season. And I think we've seen that in the first few matches. I think they've looked much fitter. The pressing's back, still not as much as I'd like to see it, but it's getting there. And I think Nuno wants more of it as well. And they look like, who have I spoken to? I had a good long chat with Japhet Tanganga just before the season started. And he was really raving about pre-season. He said it had been terrific. And he said, the best thing about Nuno that he brings, I think, for the players is he's very transparent. He's very clear, tells you not only essentially whether you have a future or not, as we've seen with some of the players that have headed out the door, but if you are in part of his plans, he lets you know very clearly what your tasks are, what he wants from you, and what he thinks you can achieve going forward. And that was the thing. We've had a couple of players, such as Ryan Sessegnon as well, that they've all kind of said the same thing. They've really got this clear focus now on exactly what they're meant to do as not only individuals, but as part of the collective. And that's all you can ask for as a player, I think. You just want to be told, essentially, what do I do? And then if you achieve it and you do it, then there's no kind of miscommunication. There's no getting angry at anything or having a hissy fit because you've done what's been asked of you. And I think that's a massive plus now.
It'll be kind of interesting to get your perspective on how it's been with like Nuno's press conferences and stuff. Obviously, he's walked into such a horrible challenge. I think for any manager, it was going to be such a difficult task with Kane wanting to leave, the fans very unhappy. So kind of from your perspective, how's it been kind of dealing with Nuno in the press?
I expected the worst, because I know quite a few reporters that cover Wolves, and they told me it's not going to be good.
You ain't getting much out of him, are you?
Exactly. You're not going to get much out of him. You're going to very easily upset him. He may even storm out of press conferences, and ultimately he sees press conferences as journalists as these pesky flies essentially buzzing around him while he's trying to do his job. But what I've got to say is overall, I've just been very fortunate. He's been very good with me. I've been very, very lucky. A lot of the answers I get out of him have been really long and kind of informative answers. There was one, I remember, it was only a couple of weeks ago, where he couldn't tell me something, and he was really apologetic because, I'm sorry, Alasdair, I can't, I can't actually tell you the information like that thing. I can't remember what it was. It was maybe saying it was a transfer window before it was closing. But I found him to be an utter gentleman. I think he's frustrated some of the other journalists. I think particularly maybe the nationals who've been trying to get that a little bit more on the main subjects, the Harry Kane stuff and things like that. And I think Nuno's just come in and very clearly just straight batted it. And he's just like, I think he's dealt with, to be fair, if I'm taking off my reporter hat, I think he's dealt with it very well. I had this conversation with a few people in Spurs when he was first appointed, before we even had the press conferences. I said, I've obviously heard things about him when it comes to press conferences, and this is just for my 2 cents, is whether you want to take it on or not, it's completely up to you as a club. I kind of feel that he's coming in as this guy that, let's be honest, a lot of Spurs fans probably didn't have in their top 5, maybe even top 10 managers they wanted in the summer. He's got to come in on a charm offensive. If he comes in and he's a bit of a nightmare in his press conferences, the press are going to very quickly turn against him, and then you'll get one dodgy result. You'll start to get all these ropey stories about what's going on behind the scenes. The fans will turn as well, and it will just be a disaster. So I said, personally, I'm sure it's a big step up for him as well. I'm sure he'd come into it with a different attitude. But I said, it's up to you guys to make sure he's very much kind of a real, charm offensive is probably the best way to put it. And I think he has. I think he's been really good. I think there's certain things we know we won't get out of him. And I know there's going to be a lot of frustrated Spurs fans out there. We've always had it. Whoever the manager was, we've always had, why haven't you asked this? Why don't you ask that question?
Yeah.
It's because we know there's absolutely 0 point. And you're actually almost wasting a question in a press conference. And I think that's what the Nationals especially are going to find with Nuno. He will just go, nope, and just move on. It's a challenge,
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how these next couple of play out, Ali, bearing in mind that we're going to come on to obviously the summer transfer window, and I say not having that second striker there, how that is going to affect, like I say, when we have those 4 competitions and we're battling all 4 fronts. I'm interested to see what it's going to be like at away League Cup ties when you're there questioning about 11:30 at night, what you'll get out of him. But another question on the screen, obviously this is probably more in jest. This is from Anthony Silva. It says, what's it like being the Spurs go-to journo? Do the other journos get jealous of all those selfie requests? Ali, how you keep up with all these selfie requests?
That's very kind of it. I wouldn't say I'm the Spurs journo. So there's a lot of really good Spurs journos on the beat. There really are. I think the fans are very, very fortunate. There's a lot of really good journos that cover Spurs regularly every single week. I'm not going to name check them because I'll forget someone and they'll all get funny with me and they'll send me messages. Why did you say me? There's a lot of them. There's a good old bunch of them, and they're there, whether it's from the Nationals, whether it's from websites, local papers, whatever. In terms of the selfie requests, yes, I do get the mickey taken out of me by a fair few of them. It's very nice. It's very nice. Yeah. I'd say the only time, how do I put this? I think it was maybe the Arsenal game, pre-season friendly. The press lads at Spurs put me right on the end of the press box, right opposite essentially the bank of fans on the west stand. It was a nightmare, to be honest. And there's no disrespect to anything because they will all love me. But when you're trying to write about a match that's going on and you're constantly getting asked Romero news every couple of seconds, my goodness, it was a new experience. And I think since then they've moved me slightly away. But that's no disrespect to the fans. I'm very fortunate, on the whole, they're very good to me. And hopefully it's just because I love what I do, and hopefully that comes across.
I've got to ask you as well, Ali, what was that like during the summer window when it's open and you're in the stadium and you're actually doing games and people are screaming at you the transfer news, Romero news, Ali, what's that like? Is that not weird? You're in your seat, you're about to cover the game and you've got people screaming transfer news at you whilst you're covering the game.
It is weird. It is very weird. I had on the train, up to Wolves, this little group of them started singing a chant about me, which was really weird. And I told my wife immediately. I kind of texted her when I came off the train. I was like, "You never guess what's just happened. This job has just got even weirder," kind of thing. It's very strange, but it's nice. There's absolutely nothing negative about it. It's lovely, and I think they know where. I grew up being a Spurs fan. It's no secret. They know I'm essentially. I don't want to use the expression "one of their own," but I don't mean it in that way. But I am kind of. I suppose one of their own on the inside, I suppose, as it were, on the inside, and hopefully that comes across. And if I can bring them whatever news I can bring them, then fantastic.
Yeah. Another interesting one on the screen there, Ali, from Kane, the long shot. It says, Ali, why does Guesty look like Lavezzi? Any reason for that?
I don't know if there's some kind of, genetic kind of link there at some point in his history.
Is he planning on keeping that beard, Ali? Is that definitely staying?
Oh, yeah. I found a photo of him the other day that cropped up on a Google search when it was only a couple of years ago. He looks about 12 years old. It's incredible what the beard does to him. I think he's very attached to the beard, and yes. We've got a new Spurs reporter called Emma Deduvet. I'm probably killing the pronunciation of her surname, but she's going to break up the beard kind of stranglehold on Tottenham at Football.London. So, I think we need it. We're very hairy chaps.
Oh my God, where do I go from there? Right, well, easily. Like I say, Harry Kane. Not that we've spoken much about Harry over the summer. Not that you spoke much about him on YouTube and the podcast. But now the dust has settled, we have seen reports suggesting that there's a possibility of Kane now potentially signing a new contract. Charlie is negotiating it apparently. Again, that's going to be interesting to see how that works. Bearing in mind, the last 6 to 12 months of Charlie and how that's orchestrated itself. But do you see Harry signing a new contract? And if so, I did hear you say this as well on the podcast to avoid you having to repeat it twice. I know you said Daniel Levy doesn't normally do release clauses in contracts. Could there be an exceptional circumstance, bearing in mind Kane's situation over the course of this summer?
Does there need to be for Tottenham? That's the thing for me. It's like he'll still have another, 2 years left, next summer. It's a bit like, I think this has been the problem for Harry Kane all along. The power lies with Tottenham, and I don't think that changes even next summer. Tottenham next summer could still say, well, Real Madrid tried to sign Mbappe this summer for 200 million, and he had 9 months left in his contract. Why should we let you go? And let's be honest, he'll probably be right up there with the Premier League's top goal scorers again this season. Why should they accept, let's say, probably still any less than 150 million or anything like that? And bearing in mind what City offered this summer, they're not going to get any bigger than that next summer. And bearing in mind, Guardiola essentially said, yeah, see you, mate, enjoy the rest of your career. I don't think they're intending to come back. I'd be surprised if Harry Kane doesn't now start thinking about a long-term future again with Spurs, purely because who's available next summer? I was talking about this with Guesty, it's like, he said maybe United. And my personal thought on that, does being at United guarantee you trophies? I don't think it does at this point in time. I think Man City, you could argue, let's be honest, they're probably going to win a trophy at least 1 or 2 a year. United are still in that. They should, but that doesn't mean they will. And I just wonder, he gets closer to Jimmy Greaves' record. I think it'd take an incredible season to break it this season, but you never know. And I just wonder whether it starts to feel like, especially if Nuno, if he has a great season and he can see a pathway and maybe that there's a future, I'd be surprised. I mean, I spoke to a few people in his camp just after he said he was staying, and there was very much a like, woo, it's early days about a contract. Let's start the season. Let's see where we go. But I'd be surprised if it's not spoken about.
So obviously this summer, the big incoming at Spurs was Fabio Paratici. I mean, he's had a fantastic impact at the club already, and kind of you can see the level of players that we've been targeting. It's really kind of stepped up. I think before he was here, it was like Joachim Andersen of Fulham, and then we've gone to sign Christian Romero. So what have you kind of made of Paratici's impact at the club already?
Yeah, and I have to say straight away, as a man who absolutely butchers pronunciations myself,
Paratici.
Paratici, I've been told I have to say, and I still manage to say Paratici.
Can we get the Italian version, Ali, just for our listeners? Can we get the Italian one that you did earlier?
Paratici, which is probably completely wrong. Some Italian will quite rightly come out and say, "What are you doing to our beautiful language?" But yeah, Fabio Paratici. Well, he's come in. Let's be honest, he's come in from probably one of the most elite clubs in football, in Juventus, and he's done that for, I think it was there for 11 years. He's worked at the very top of the game. And you remember when Poch spoke about all the dark arts and all that sort of stuff when they played Juventus? He was talking about Paratici. He was one of the guys doing that. So Spurs have, I don't want to say they've brought in the dark arts. It's like Voldemort's coming in the club or something. But they've just brought in this top drawer kind of guy. And he's got a very, terrific reputation across Europe, an incredible contact base. There's very few agents or clubs he hasn't got a terrific relationship with. And I think as a reporter, I won't lie, he's been an absolute nightmare in terms of the way he deals with stuff. I've never come across anyone that works that way. To have essentially 10 deals almost lined up for every position in your squad. As a reporter, it's mind-blowing. It's absolutely mind-blowing because in the past, I could go out there and I could say, I think that was very much what maybe Spurs fans looked to me to do, was the bringer of doom. Sorry, that's not true.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that this summer because, yes, Spurs had held talks with most of the agents of the players involved. It was just he was working out which one he was going to move for at the very end. But yeah, he's a there's no coincidence that Levy's looked for him for the last, I think it's half a decade, been trying to get him to Spurs. And he is, I mean, I don't know what you guys think, but the 2 interviews that I've heard so far with him have absolutely cemented how top drawer he is. I've been trying to get an interview myself, which I hope I'm going to get at some point. And I don't think that will change my mind in any way. But yeah, he knows what he's doing. And I think it's not going to, I think a lot of Spurs fans, maybe myself included, maybe expected even more this transfer window. But I think in reality, it's going to take him a few transfer windows to kind of stamp his mark on this club.
Yeah, and like I say, it's interesting. We've got a question here from that Tottenham fan who says the same thing. You know, you mentioned it there. Has the past summer transfer window been the hardest to track? Like I said, it probably has been because of the nature of having all these links lined up. An interesting question on the screen, Alasdair, and it's great to kind of get you on to ask you this kind of thing because we know that whatever you do when you do come out of a story, I've heard you often say that you try and get it checked from both sides, and that's because of what you've done in the past in terms of even not in Tottenham, just generally in terms of your background and being a journalist. Out of interest, how does that work? Because like I say, Kev there on the screen says, is that a source at Spurs? You have to marry that with somebody else, and how does that work for you then to feel confident enough to then put that out on Spurs Twitter? Because anybody put anything on Spurs Twitter, that's a very brave way to go generally.
Yeah, no, like you say, that's been something that was drilled into me as a young reporter. Is never report anything unless you've got confirmation from at least another source as well. I think, as all reporters do, I think we've got to make sure that we have sources in every different aspect, really. So let's say if you only had sources within the club, you're only going to get stuff that comes out of the club, and that can only be it's almost like a PR exercise, which, if anyone's heard my rants, is certainly not the way I kind of go. I think, you know, whether it's player agents, whether it's people that deal with the club, whether it's people that work inside the club, you've just, I've been doing it for, just Spurs alone, we're looking at half a decade now. So you build up a lot of good contacts all around the club, inside it and outside it. And that's the way I try and do it, is just make sure, I'm going to roll out this cheesy motto all the time, but, it's better to be right than first for me, always. That's always my view. And I get in the modern world, it's all about, getting the news out there as quickly as you can, but I just want to make sure I'm right. And even then, it still doesn't always mean it's going to happen. As the manager search, which I'm sure we'll come on to, definitely proved, you can be 100% right, and in 24 hours later still be 100% wrong.
So true.
Incredible profession.
Another question that I just wanted to ask on Fabio Paratici, is that right? Do you know it's so frustrating because
it's a great drinking game, this show, I tell you, by 11 o'clock at night doing this.
A number of times I've been practicing his name and I've come on here.
I know. It's imprinted on my brain the original way, and I cannot. It's been a nightmare. I probably go to sleep the same Paratici myself. The wife probably some weird deviant,
So obviously he and Steve Hitchin, they've been very prominent on the Spurs bench. I know a lot was made of that on Twitter. For me, I kind of saw that as it was kind of just causing a bit of trouble. But kind of what have you made of that, of them being so close to the players? And is it kind of true that the players aren't keen on that?
Not from what I've heard. But from everything I've heard, I know especially Steve Hitchin he's quite popular among the players. He's a guy that's been there for a fair few years now, and he was kind of one of Poch's trusted lieutenants, I guess is probably one of the ways to say it. They were very close, and funnily enough, he's really close with Paratici as well. They've been mates for years, and I think you can see that, like you say. The whole kind of on the touchline thing it was weird. I saw some people on Twitter saying, like, why are they there? What are they doing? How dare they undermine Nuno? And it's like, well, no, there's a very simple explanation. It's to do with COVID regulations. They're in a thing called the red zone, which means that if you have any dealings with the squad and the players, you then have to remain with the squad and players. So if they go to the match with the players, or they've been talking to them in the day at Hotspur way, and then they go up and sit in the stands among other people, you're breaking the bubble. And you're kind of, you're having contact with other people, and then you're bringing that back inside the bubble. So until probably, I think they're going to have a review in October, I think, the Premier League. Until then, they have to remain within that group. And no, from what I understand, I think they're pretty close to the players. I said this, I can't remember if I said it to Guesty or not, that if I don't understand the logic of, I saw something about the players wasn't it something about the players feeling they can't say what they want to say because they're there? It's like, they're sitting behind Nuno. What are you saying? This is rubbish. I hate tactics. It's rubbish. You're not going to say that anyway. So having the other two behind you makes absolutely zero difference whatsoever to what you're coming out with. So, do you know what? Personally, I think it's been lovely to see passion from the people. You know, our current, you know, always our go-to person for the powers that be at Tottenham was Daniel Levy, who, let's be honest, isn't the most emotionally accessible guy in the world. We don't see him dancing around doing a jig and stuff like that. So to have these guys that essentially are the connection with us, with the hierarchy at Spurs, absolutely, like I said, those dark arts as well, going at the fourth official, having a go at Guardiola during the City match, and absolutely, like Steve Hitchen was giving like Bergwijn a bear hug after, I think it was the City game. You know, it just showed, I like them all going in the same direction. I think that can only be good.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
yeah. Go on, Ricky.
No, I agree. I mean, I got some funny ones on the screen, and I got to put in here. Well, maybe get their own spin-off show. What do you reckon? Is that going to catch on?
I think it would be fascinating. Yeah, new Amazon documentary, I guess. Yeah, just following the two of them around.
I tell you.
Yeah, I'd be intrigued to see kind of what happens long term with Steve Hitchen, because ultimately, you know, he was without the name, he was the kind of sporting director figure. So, however close he is to Paratici, I still do wonder how long that relationship continues. It'd be fascinating to kind of watch. He looks like he's enjoying himself. But I do wonder whether there'll be a part of him that kind of wants to go back to being the sole boss and maybe at another club. So, yeah, maybe one to keep an eye on.
Cool. Before we go for a very quick break, we're going to take a few more questions that have come in here. Let's go to this one, Ali. This is from Sebastian Finn on the screen there. It says, do you panic or is it worrying if another very reliable reporter gives a conflicting report to something you have put out?
No, because I think that's the nature of the game, isn't it? We all have different sources. Well, most, you know, sometimes our sources will coincide, but on the whole, people will be talking to different people about stuff, and that naturally brings stuff that's going to be different. I wouldn't say it worries me. I think I've probably been in it too long now. I mean, like, even a good example probably is I broke the story about the training kit sponsor, and that was way back in July. And I've got to admit, there was a point where I was like, it's been a few months now, kind of, why have they not actually announced this? This is getting weird. And then eventually, it was the other day, Gettier were actually finally announced. And what I found even more frustrating was Gettier. I had an inkling that it was them. And I even contacted them. Do you remember they were named like a club partner or something?
Yeah.
And I even got in touch with Gettier and I said, are you guys going to be, you know, sponsoring the training kit as well? No, we're just to do with the stadium and we'll have a board up and all that. I was like, you swines, you know. I could have confirmed that again.
Couldn't have given you the inside scoop.
Exactly. So, I wouldn't say I worry anymore. It's just the nature of the game.
Yeah. Another one on the screen there, Ali, from Emre, who says, for the manager search, who was the manager you wanted to come and see manage Tottenham? I mean, bearing in mind at one point, I think you had a chance yourself. I think we all could have had a go where it was going at one point. I mean, who would you have liked to see? Would you have actually seen? I mean, tell us who you would like to see. And I'm also intrigued to think from you, would Conte have worked? Bear in mind, you know, we just had Mourinho. Would that have worked in your mind?
So let's start with the one I probably would have liked, although I still felt it was too soon. I probably would have loved to see Poch come back. But there was always this part of me that felt he just needs that little bit more distance still. I felt it was too early. But Conte, I was probably one of the few, maybe, in the face of the kind of the support he had, that I just had this wariness about. He's a fantastic manager, don't get me wrong, and he has proved time and time again what he can do. I just couldn't see him being able to do that with Tottenham. I just felt he would have needed too much to do it. And, you know, I'm not saying it's entirely his fault. There's obviously some kind of mismanagement that's gone on in different areas. But you look at Inter Milan, and essentially broken now, aren't they? They really are. And a lot of people say that about Chelsea. It took a little bit of time for them after he went as well to then kind of put it all back together again. And that's not to say he's not a great coach at all, because he clearly is. I just felt that he just didn't quite fit. And to be honest, I think probably a few of us felt that about Mourinho at the start as well. Sometimes you just feel that however brilliant they are, and however much their CV screams success, it doesn't always translate to every club. So yeah, Poch was probably the romantic notion in my head. I think I would have liked to see, but I still don't know how well it would have worked and how much would have changed at Tottenham from what he grew very frustrated with. So yeah, it probably was Poch, but I would have probably even been wrong if he'd come in.
I just find the irony, Andy, that we were going after we put the CV up of the man we sacked only 18 months ago for the guy that we want to go get back in it. Only that could be Tottenham. I just think that was just so hilarious.
Yeah, and when I heard the exact kind of fit, the profile they were looking for, and you're just like, that's Poch. What are you doing? You're literally trying to essentially employ a Poch clone. And I think that was very much why there was that really serious point in the summer when they thought, well, Poch is kind of interesting coming back. Should we just get him in as we are looking for another Poch? And it just didn't happen. But who knows what the future holds?
I think only Tottenham in any industry could do that. I honestly think if any other industry you're looking at a CV, only Spurs could go back to the man they got rid of 18 months ago. But hey ho. But for our listeners on audio, we're going to go for a very quick break. When we come back, we're going to dive into the summer transfer window. Ali's thoughts on that, and of course, our thoughts ahead of Crystal Palace to come. For our viewers on YouTube, and I say a huge amount of you watching us on this international break, thank you so much. I know it's down to England the way they're playing, or if you're enjoying the content, so thank you so much. We'll crack on with that, and I'm going to hand back over to the wonderful Jamie Brown.
So obviously, we just wanted to touch on the summer transfer window. It's all closed now. I think it was 5 players that came through the door, and I think it was 8 players that left this summer. Obviously, brought in. Got in a lot of new young players. Of course, a lot of players were moved on that we felt needed to be moved on. So, kind of, what would you rate Spurs' transfer business for the summer just gone?
Yeah, I think someone asked me to give a figure for it before, and I said 7.5. I think that's what I give it out of 10, because I think there's probably more positives than I think people have seen. I think there's been a lot of, especially some of the injuries over the international break have worried people a bit, and I think they've looked at various positions. But I'd say if you actually list the successes, you look at, the biggest success probably is keeping Harry Kane. I know it's a cliche, but it is a signing in itself, because how the hell do you replace Harry Kane? What you'd have had to do in the transfer market. Essentially they've kept themselves, bought themselves, however you want to call it. They have got a world-class striker up front, and that is what Tottenham have for next season, or this season. I think tying Sonny down to a 4-year contract. All these little things, maybe people just think of the actual transfers. They kind of think you've got arguably one of the best pairings in the Premier League, and you've got them up front again this season. Then you look at all the players that have headed out the door. The players that, and I hate the expression deadwood so much, but that's the term that people were using. I'd say more players that just probably had reached that point at Tottenham where it was better for them to move on, or for Tottenham just to have a fresh kind of look in those positions. So you've got a lot of older players, a lot of money off the wage bill, which frees it up going forward as well. When you're looking at the players they want to bring in, and it's been a refresh in terms of, you mentioned the 5 players, and you look at the age of them. You think of all the players that have gone out the door, and I think it's only Lloris is over 30 at Spurs now. And then you've got Son and Doherty who are 29, and they're the next oldest. Everyone, all these players that come in, you've got a 20-year-old in Brian Hill, you've got 23-year-old Romero, 22-year-old Emerson, Pape Matasarov, who's gone back to Metz, he's only 18. Galini at 26 is a young goalkeeper. It really is. It's very much a refresh. Obviously, we all want more. Of course we do. That's the nature of the transfer.
We always want more, Ali. We always want more. When do we not want more?
Yeah, exactly. And even Mourinho, I remember asking Mourinho about the transfer window. I can't remember if it was this one or whether it was last summer or one of the winter ones. And he said, look, no manager is ever going to tell you they're happy with the transfer window. There's always something more you could have done. And I do believe that. I still feel personally, I still probably would have liked to back up striker of sorts, although I 100% understood how difficult that has been for Spurs. I think we've seen that in the kind of successes and failures they've had in that position. And there's always the part of me that would have liked an Eriksen replacement. But hey, the more and more I've been thinking about it in recent days, perhaps Brian Hill is going to be that guy. Maybe that's what they're going to groom him into. And a certain French chap that I have a membership card for his fan club could even end up being that guy. So,
we're coming on to him very soon. Keep that membership close to you. We're coming on to him very soon.
I will.
Yeah. I do want to start about Spurs' first summer signing, of course. Pierluigi Gollini came through the door, joining on loan with an option to make his move from Atlanta permanent. And he's expected really to kind of press his claims now against Lloris for that number 1 jersey. I mean, we had, again, loads of questions come in. There's one on the screen there from Ollie saying, will he be number 1 next season, in your opinion? I'm also intrigued because I think he's got to play up to 20 Premier League games for us to trigger the option to buy it. Please tell me if I'm wrong or right in that. If it is correct, where do you see him playing the 20 Premier League games? At what point in the season will he get that run? Because Lloris at the moment seems to be the Premier League number 1. I know I've only played 3 Premier League games at the moment. I'm just intrigued to know from your perspective when he does get those games.
I've been trying to get confirmation from his people on that because there's still a kind of a miscommunication on whether it's 20 Premier League games or 20 competitive appearances.
Right. Okay.
And in which case, if it's competitive, he might get there. He might get there and cut that.
Yeah.
I mean, personally, he wouldn't have been brought in without the very clear instruction to him that, yes, you're going to take over. That's going to be your... There was a little bit of a battle for the spot at Atalanta, but on the whole, he was probably mainly the first choice there. And that he will have been brought to Spurs with that kind of thinking in mind. But what I would say, I'm intrigued to see what happens with Hugo, because I think, and this is only my opinion, I think he's got more consistent the older he's got. And I think taking away the Pochettino carefully playing the ball out from the back has kind of eliminated a lot of the silly mistakes he was making with his feet. And I think just allowing him to concentrate on what he does as a goalkeeper, I think he's been a bit of a rock. Even last season, which was a really tough season for Spurs, I think he was one of the few consistent performers, with probably Højbjerg and Kane and Son as well. Yeah. And I think, I mean, he very publicly came out, didn't he, recently and said that Spurs haven't offered him a new contract yet. Yeah, I'll be intrigued to see whether he is offered one by the end of the season, because for me, I think he's still so good that to lose him on a free is almost daft business sense, really. Yeah. If you're going to look at it in the cold light of that. But they may go the other way and they may think he's been such a terrific servant. And if he does want to go, say, back to France, or he wants to maybe have a bit of a spell in the MLS, maybe they just look at it and say, okay, fair play, you've earned it. If you want to do that, you go for it. I don't know about you, but I just feel like a lot of the stuff that's come out in recent weeks, the 300 appearances, that brilliant video they did with him, was really, really good. It almost felt like the beginning of a swan song, which would be sad, because I think Hugo's brilliant. He's lovely to interview. He always fronts up. Even in the worst of performances, he will come out and speak to you, and he will be very honest. And I think he's one of those rare things at Tottenham Hotspur. He's a real winner. And the guy's won the World Cup. You can't get any higher than that. And he was the captain. Yeah. And I think he brings something to Tottenham that no one else can.
Agreed. Before I hand it back over to Jay, I mean, Anthony Silva's going through these questions like nobody's business. There's some great questions there. Ali, there's one on the screen for you there. Who's most likely to collaborate on Gollini's next hip-hop album? Anyone from that Spurs squad you'd like to see collaborate with him? Or yourself, maybe?
Definitely not me. I saw someone saying today on Twitter that AJ Tracy should try to cunningly write me into his lyrics on one of his next tracks.
It's got to happen. It's got to happen.
Quite frankly, that would be incredible. It's never going to happen, but it would be incredible. And the street cred with my kids would suddenly shoot up.
I bet it would.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Sergio was very much into his music, and I think he bossed the playlist a lot from what I heard in the kind of the Times dressing room. Obviously, he's gone on his own path now. I don't know. I don't know, to be honest with you. I don't know. That's a tough one. I would have gone for Serge. Now, I think all bets are off now, really. It's for whoever wants to claim the music at the club.
We'll see. We shall see.
So obviously the second player that came through the door this summer was Brian Hill from Sevilla. Came in for a cash deal plus Eric Lamela. I know a player that's obviously you were very fond of. But it'll be interesting to kind of see what role he'll play in the squad this year. Obviously, as you mentioned earlier, he's a very, very talented player, but he does still kind of look very raw. So it'll be interesting to get your take on kind of what you think his role in the squad will be this season.
Yeah, he's a fascinating player. He really is. I got a really kind of close-up look at him in Portugal. I went to the Pesos match, the first leg, and I saw everything good and everything bad about him all in one performance. He's very young, and I think he's very raw, and I think that shows in the way he plays. He is very creative and clever, and he can kind of conjure something out of nothing, which, like I've said, that's the kind of thing I love to watch in football. However, the flip side is when you've got a very tactically compact team where everyone knows what they're doing, to have this chap who is just suddenly wandering across the pitch and just very much doing his own thing. I saw certain players, I think Sessegnon had a bit of a nightmare that day trying to cover the gaps he was leaving behind him. As Harry Winks had a real shout at him at one point and to say, like, get back. We're losing all this shape. And I asked Nuno about it afterwards, and he was really good, actually. He said, he will be terrific when we give him very set tasks. And that's, I think, what he needs. He is a bit of a maverick. I watched him again yesterday for the Spain under-21s playing Lithuania. You can even see that when he was even in the captain role, he still likes to kind of wander a little bit. But I've been trying to say in the second leg they played him in a deeper role. I think that's maybe where the Modric comparisons came with. He's very versatile. He can play on the left, right, or the centre, which is why I think he's happy to wander, because he's comfortable playing in all the roles. I'd like to see him in that number 10 role. I'd like to see how he operates there. I think he's got a lot of bulking up to do. It's a cliche, but I do feel that the Premier League might eat him up a bit in his early months if he doesn't do that. That's not to say it's not possible. Modric is the best example of that. But I think Modric just had that strength and that low centre of gravity that made it very difficult to get the ball off. And I don't think he's got that just yet. I think he's quite slight. But yeah, no, he's probably the one that maybe excites me the most with the level that he can reach. I think he could be terrific.
Yeah, we must have said, and it's always going to happen on Ali's day off. Harry Kane has scored. When has Ali not had a day off and saying Spurs it does not happen? So Ali, that was always going to happen, wasn't it?
Can I just say that? Can I say the professionalism? I'm going to congratulate myself on it. Happened midway as I was speaking.
I was waiting for you to say something. I was like, Ali, you going to say anything?
I know, but he is also holding his ankle right now as well.
Yeah,
so,
I've just noticed that. It's just we've been really. I mean, we are going to come on to Palace later. At this point, I think, Ali, you might get a game the way it's going. You might have to come off the press box.
I know. Between me and Dame Scarlett,
can't we just play Guesty up top when you're on the left hand side?
Yeah, but no, it was a cracking goal.
It
Absolutely,
was a great goal.
Harry Kane, wasn't it? A bit of a knuckleball kind of shot.
Yeah, and I'd say we'll just be keeping our eyes peeled now. Ali's had 2 eyes on him all summer. Now he's got to keep 2 eyes on him again now and see if, like I say, he does look okay. So one to keep an eye on. Ali, next coming through the door for Tottenham was the big centre-back we were all waiting for in Christian Romero. Now, at the moment, it's a loan deal which is expected to eventually become permanent for a fee of 42 million. And what I'm intrigued to know from you is that whilst obviously he's been a big target for Tottenham, they've got him over the line, does it concern you, despite the great start to the season from both Davinson Sanchez and Eric Dyer, that I remember in the summer you wrote a piece saying that even though they got Romero, they're still looking, I think, for a leader next to him. The fact that Spurs did not sign that leader next to him, does that concern you for the rest of the season? Of course, we've got a January window, but I mean, between now and January, do you think we've got enough there when you see the erraticness at times of Dyer and Sanchez last season? Listen, we hope that's going to eradicate from their game and Nuno's going to improve them. Does it worry you overall at all?
Maybe, but ultimately, it's about that chap you just said, Nuno. It's all about him, man. And he was asked a similar thing, and he said, look, I don't care. I don't want a shouter. I don't want someone that barks at the opposition, at his teammates. I just want a unit that works well together. And I do feel like we have to kind of find out essentially what player Romero is going to be. I've always said I think Romero is an absolute game changer. I think he's going to be superb. You don't get to be Serie A Defender of the Year in that league, which is, let's be honest, weighted towards defending without being absolutely top draw. And I think once he gets up and running, once we sort out this international break, utter chaos, and he actually gets a run of games for Tottenham, I think he will be a massive. Nuno's very excited about it. He really is. He keeps going on about how quickly he's going to adapt. He's got no, normally they take the pressure off them when you get a new signing, and then normally a manager will go, oh, you know, he's got to adapt to the culture and the lifestyle and all of that. Nuno was very much like, no, he'll be fine. Don't worry. He'll get straight in there and he will adapt quickly. And I think we will see that. And I think, you know, what we're seeing with Dyer and Sanchez, I think the biggest thing is it's the Romero factor as well. I think they've realised, okay, you know, we've got someone that really is seriously going to take our place here. We have to be better than we've been. And I think they have been. I think they've been terrific. And the one thing I'd say about Dyer is maybe he can be that leader. He's got a lot of other things working against him at times. His concentration lapses, and so does Sanchez, of course. But I would say that, especially without the fans in the stadium, you could hear Dyer's voice a lot. He is that guy. If you do, I know Nuno downplayed it, but if you do want someone talking to the back line, it was Dyer. Lloris as well. I don't think people kind of understand quite how loud Lloris is. Maybe they can't hear him when all the fans are back, but he makes his point heard. I think there's probably enough there right now. If you put Joe Rodon in there as well, I mean, that's 4 centre-backs, and you've got Tanganga and at a push Ben Davies as well if you want to do a back 3. I think there's probably enough right now. I think it's one they'll look at again in January if they're struggling, especially if it just frustrates me even thinking about it. But if you are going to lose Romero and Sanchez for the next, you know, two more international breaks before you even get to Christmas, and if that does prove chaotic, then they're going to have to remedy it in some way. But I think there's enough there, and I kind of trust Nuno. I think he's proven so far that he seems to have got a handle on it. You know.
So obviously another player that came to the door this summer was Pape Matar Sarr from Metz. Obviously gone back on loan there. He looks like a really interesting player. I think he's a guy who can play in a number of different roles. Is this a player that Spurs fans should be getting quite excited about this season?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I have to do a loan roundup each week, so I'm kind of able to keep a very close eye on it, which is great. For what it was described to me as by people in the club, was that this is another Dele Alli deal. This is very much we have to act now. We have to get this kid because he's 18 years old. And he's already proving to be one of the best talents in Ligue 1. You know, he's a guy that we have to get done. And if that means sending him back for the season, so be it. We have to take that hit because the worst thing you could do is let him turn into an absolute superstar over the next season, and then you're fighting with the likes of the Cities, the Barcelonas, Real Madrid, and all of that. So the word is to be excited about him. I think it's probably works in Spurs' favour. I know some people would have liked to have seen him earlier, but having him spend that year just maturing, just growing up, working with coaches he knows really well, and essentially just having a year to get his mindset ready for a big move across to England, I think it's a clever idea. He's only 18. This is the thing. We sometimes in our heads we forget that the kids, they really are. I know technically he's an adult at 18, but come on, God, what were we like at 18 years old, for goodness sake? It's a huge move for him. And if he has a year to prepare himself, it kind of does cut down slightly on that adaptation period, and it will help him hit the ground running. And he's a versatile kid. He's say kid. It sounds so patronising to say that. He's a versatile young man. He can play a deeper role. He can play an attacking role. He can play as a support striker. He can play on the wings as well. I think for him, he's another one of those players that will fill a lot of gaps at Spurs, but also for him, it will be important to work out where his best position is.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Ali, about Spurs' deadline day signing Emerson Royale. It's an interesting one because, like I say, 25 million, Brazilian right back. I keep looking back at Spurs and Brazilian players, and I think we've just been either really unlucky or with the scouting. Jill keeps thinking Gilberto. That keeps running through my head. Didn't Redknapp bring him on, then sub him back off at one point in the same game? I can't remember. This is kind of going through my head, and obviously we've been unlucky with obviously, like I say, certain players. And there's amazing Brazilian players out there. Of course, we know there is. But the interesting one for me, Emerson, is that the reports coming out was, at the time, he only was like really looking forward to playing for Barcelona. He was kind of psyching himself up for the new season. And it's almost like, well, we can't actually afford to pay you. So you're going to have to go. And I've just got this vision of the bloke being pushed out of the club, and he's going, "You go to Spurs." Again, do you think, from a desire perspective, that his head's going to be the right place? I mean, listen, it's Spurs are a massive club. Don't get me wrong, but it's I want to say, listen, we're Barcelona when we can play like Barcelona sometimes, not all the time, of course. But do you think there's a desire concern there at all? Do you think he'll fit right in with the club?
I wouldn't worry about that at all. I did feel sorry for him. I really did. It was like, I mean, I suppose it's the likes of us. We dreamt about playing for Spurs all our lives. Obviously, with no offence to you guys, but we're not on Emerson's level. Of course,
no.
It was as much as we'd like to be.
So it wasn't last week anyway, I can tell you.
He dreamt of playing for Barcelona all his life. He finally gets it. And then, because of the utter financial ruins that club was in, or mess they're in, he had to go out the door. He had the unveiling in front of the crowd. He had Laporta, the president, and everything, all kind of bigging him up for the future. And the poor guy suddenly told him, sorry, mate, you're heading out the door now. But what I'd say is, I think from everything kind of we've seen of him and what I've heard is, he's just, I think it was quite important. His first message when he got to Spurs, I think he put it on Instagram, was "time to be happy."
Yeah.
And it's a very simple phrase, but I just think it spoke volumes. And it was kind of like, okay, it was pretty devastating to be suddenly told by your dream club that you're not wanted within a month, despite the fact that, I think he'd been involved, and it wasn't even like it was on the fringes or anything. And I think he just suddenly thought, okay, let's go there. Let's go to the Premier League. It's the biggest league in the world, let's be honest. And, Lucas Moura there. We talk about Brazilians that haven't done particularly well. Lucas Moura clearly, he gave us one of the greatest nights, in recent Tottenham history.
Yeah.
And he'll, as he did with Carlos Vinicius, will help him settle in. And I'm intrigued to see what he is. I must admit, and I've been very kind of honest about this, I've heard differing views on him. There's a few Spanish journalists that maybe aren't quite as complimentary about some aspects of his play. I think the key thing that everyone says, and this is probably the thing to maybe focus on, is he's very raw. He's very young, 22, still isn't the player he's going to be yet. Yeah. He had a very good season with Betis last year. And I think the key thing is he's got a lot of learning to do. And I know this is a bit of an ask for football fans in general, but I think they're going to have to be patient with him. I think he's going to do a lot of exciting things. I think physically, I think in the terms of getting forward and everything, he will sweep forward with great energy and excitement, and that'll be great to watch. Defensively, it sounds like, from everything I'm told, he did well at Betis. So hopefully, I think technically that's what people say. Sometimes that lets him down on occasions, which is unusual for a Brazil international. Apparently, that's the one element that sometimes lets him down.
He'll fit right in there, Andy, then.
Well, this is my thing. It's very much, I think the Spurs are going to have to be patient. But, if anyone's very good at bringing on kind of attacking fullbacks, almost wing backs, Nuno's pretty decent at that. So he's in good hands.
Can I ask you before I bring Jay in very quickly? It does feel like then, maybe, Andy, this is now going to be a straight battle between Emerson and Tanganga for that right back spot. So very quickly, where does that leave Doherty? This is a guy that played under Nuno. He's managed him, and by all accounts, I think when everyone saw Nuno being appointed, everyone thought, well, hold on a second, this is Doherty's perfect scenario. It's the man that he's worked with and hasn't really been involved at all. I mean, obviously, I know he's maybe a couple of the Europa Conference League games had a bit of a feature in there, but where does that leave his future at Tottenham? Does he have one, in your opinion?
I think he does. The club were willing to listen to offers for him in the summer. They were. I don't think that's, the greatest shock, especially when they were looking to bring in another right back. But he's still, I think the big thing for Matt Doherty is just taking every chance he gets. I wouldn't say, probably by his own admission, he's been doing that. I don't think he's absolutely shone. I think he's had a couple of games, specifically left the last game of the season. I thought he played really well. But I just feel like he hasn't quite staked his claim, is probably the best way to put it. I would say, though, the battle between Tanganga and Emerson is going to be different because it's going to be, they're very different players and they'll be used in very different tactics. They'll be used in very different formations. Sometimes Tanganga will be the option when you're playing Reguilon on one side. Sometimes you might play Davies and then let Emerson run right on the other side. So I think it's more Doherty up against Emerson, probably. Yeah, it's a tough one for him. It just hasn't really worked out for him. He still is, in my mind, a wing back, and he's been asked to play right back, and it hasn't quite fitted.
Okay, so I've just got I've been in a bit of trouble from the chat saying I keep looking down, and I'm actually reading questions. So just to clarify that, I'm not being rude. So yeah. Anyway,
Edward Hurley, I mean, that is hilarious. The way he's in caps shouting, "Jamie, don't be rude. Head up and listen, my boy."
I didn't notice anyway, and I'm constantly looking up at the England game as well, just to make sure Harry Kane's moving freely. Said, "No, don't worry about it at all."
So yes, I apologise, David. Anyway, obviously one of the big players that did remain at Spurs this year was Tanguy Ndombele, a guy we all know you're a very big fan of. Of course, I think there was I think even yourself were reporting that Spurs are willing to listen to offers for him. Is he a guy that kind of has a long-term future at Spurs under Nuno, or is that be a situation that Spurs might look to reassess in January?
It's the old classic, isn't it? It's up to Tanguy. It really is. You know, I think Tanguy wanted to leave this summer. He did. There was no, there's no secret about that. He made it quite clear. But for Spurs to let go of their club record signing, you're looking at a huge bid would have to come in. I've seen some people in the summer were saying, "Oh, shove him into a swap deal with someone." It's like, football doesn't really work like that, you know. What kind of player is going to be that big that let's say even if Spurs were looking to recoup the 60 million plus that they bought him for, it's like it doesn't work like that. And I can't say enough. I'm so repetitive, boring on Ndombele, so I'm sorry to anyone, but for me, you get Tanguy Ndombele playing, you've got probably arguably the best player in the Premier League. I think he's that gifted. I do. I think he's got these incredible natural talents. It's just everything else. It's just the will and the focus and the desire. And this, unfortunately for Tanguy, it's something that was always said about him as a kid, when he was at his French clubs when he was younger. Even at Lyon, sometimes I think it was Bruno Genesis, his coach there, would sometimes say he just needs to be up for it in every game, not just the big games kind of thing. And I think we saw Ryan Mason essentially gave him, I think it was the Southampton game, and Mourinho fans still have decided that this is a dig at Mourinho. But I tweeted after that game, Tanguy came out of the dressing room and he was in the greatest of spirits. He came out, he was waving at us in the press box, smiling away. And I tweeted purely that, Tonguy's enjoyed himself tonight. The Mourinho fans have hated that for the last year. They think I'm saying that he was finally rid of Jose Mourinho, which wasn't what I'm saying at all.
No. Yeah.
That he enjoyed himself. But my point about mentioning that game is Ryan Mason really was not impressed with his performance that night. He absolutely thought he stank the place out, which I think, if I remember correctly, I think that was right. I think it was only later in the game he started to suddenly wake up. And I think maybe he was involved in, I can't remember. He was involved in something to do with the goal.
Yeah.
But after that, we didn't see Tanguy, did we? For the rest of that kind of the Mason period, he was very much sent to the fringes. And obviously, he was bombed out of the cup final and all of that. And I think it just says it all about him, unfortunately. But that's always the way with football, isn't it? Is you get these incredible talents that sometimes the other side doesn't match up to it. And I just hope with Tanguy it's not too late. He's still, was 24, something like that. He's still so young. Yeah. Because if Nuno can get the best out of him, and I really believe, and this is no disrespect to Dele Alli, because I think he's had a really good start to the season. If you have Skip and Højbjerg and you've had Ndombele in front of him, that absolutely should terrify midfields across the Premier League.
Yeah, totally agree.
It would free him up to just wreak havoc. So I hope he's got a long-term future, but it's down to Tanguy.
Do you think that maybe Aurier and Sissoko's departure will have some sort of impact on it in kind of maybe a positive way or even a negative way?
It's a tough one now. I've seen a lot of people kind of say it, and partly that's my fault because I wrote in a piece earlier in the summer about him wanting to leave, and I mentioned some of the reasons. I also mentioned that he wasn't best pleased that two of the people that had helped him settling in were looking like they were heading out of the club. And I think some people then, sometimes these some Twitter accounts take that in a certain way, and that's the headline. And that wasn't exactly the thrust of why he wanted to leave. Yeah. I think it would be unfair to paint Aurier and Sissoko as these guys that essentially were a bad influence or something. I've never got that impression. What I'd always say is that those two guys were two of the best trainers at Tottenham, you know, and you know, you could see how incredibly fit they were. Certainly when you're looking at the guys that were the fittest on the pitch and who had trained the hardest, you couldn't say those two weren't. So I wouldn't really go in that direction. I would probably say that having different people around you sometimes, changing things up, having a fresh outtake isn't the worst thing. It maybe gives him a bit of a fresh start with a fresh manager, a fresh kind of hierarchy above as well. But as I just said, you know, it's not about the people around him. There's only one man that can kind of get everything going in the right direction. That's himself.
Yeah, I mean, Ali, for everyone that listens to you on YouTube and obviously the Golden Guest, I mean, we know how much you love Ndombele with the memberships that you are still, like I say, handing out at the moment for the time being. How long they're going to last for, if that's till January or till beyond that. DVV says on the screen there, who do you love more? Certainly on the Mellow. There's only one you can save. There's only one, Ali. Who are you saving?
Oh, man. They're such different players in terms of one was incredible passion and desire, and one is incredible natural gifts. I'd say if I were to, I'll twist that slightly. If I were to pay money to watch one of them play, it would be Tongi. Because I think what he can do with the football, I mean, everyone, you know, the stock answer at Spurs used to always be who's the best player at Spurs, who's the best player at training, blah, blah. It was always Dembele. It is now Tongi. Everyone says Tongi. Everyone I've asked that question says what he does, we don't even dream at night of being able to do what Tongi does in training sessions. And if he can just take that onto a football pitch in the Premier League, I think the rest of the world will see it.
Such a shame. If you give me Lamella's work rate and Ndombele's ability, you've got what a player you'd have there. My God.
Exactly.
I'll tell you, what a player you'd have there. Right, Ali, on that midfield situation we've got, Lascelles saying that Jason McGovern, who obviously I know you know Jason, he's been on our shows for the last 6 years, who drives him mad about Ndombele. Why do you love him, Rick? He only does 60 minutes. This is what I care for. But he's got the ability. And it's the same, like I say, with Lascelles. So again, we've seen him in glimpses. You know, I have to remind myself now, Ali, this is Lascelles. I think he's coming to his 3rd season at Tottenham. And, you know, for all that, you know, for those years we've seen him, you know, in terms of ability on the pitch, again, we've not seen consistently him be able to complete 90 minutes. How worrying is it for you? And I know, again, you reported on this heavily during the summer that you wanted someone to come in and fill that void still left by Christian Eriksen. And we haven't yet got that. We hope Ndombele will be that person. Do you, again, have cause of concern that over the course of the season, that is going to come to haunt us, that we didn't bring in that creative midfielder?
Maybe. I'd say in defence of Lascelles, I think he's been very unfortunate in that he's never really had a proper pre-season, which is ridiculous when you just say this is his 3rd kind of season. Every single time there's either been an injury or, you know, there's COVID stuff, isolation, whatever. There's always been something that's kind of stopped him really getting that base level of fitness up. And I think that's contributed to various little kind of niggling injuries that then become bigger things. I still don't believe that he or Tongi are exact Eriksen types. I think they're both probably slightly more comfortable being deeper on the pitch. I do think both of them can take on the role. As I say, I suppose I said this earlier, but I still think Hill maybe naturally is probably more akin to Eriksen, or could be. You know, I kind of asked various people at Spurs, like, why essentially you at the club not looking for an attacking midfielder of an Eriksen type? And what I kept hearing back was, well, we've got Tongi, we've got Lascelles, we've got Dele Alli, who's an attacking midfielder, we've got Hill now. Lucas can play as a number 10 as well, you know, to probably maybe his best performances last season were in that number 10 role. I'd still say none of them for me are a natural Eriksen replacement, but I can understand the logic of if you're stacked with potential number 10s, then maybe. I still don't know. Lascelles and Tongi can definitely play those killer through balls, but I just don't think naturally that's their game. So yeah, we'll see as the season goes on. It's one of those where one of us is going to be proved right or wrong, whether it's the club or us on the outside saying that, you know, they need they need that advanced playmaker. But it always reminds me of. Do you remember back in the day that everyone wanted a left winger at Spurs?
Yeah,
it was in Comley's time. Yeah. Oh my goodness! Even Comley started to get so frustrated. He was like, Spurs fans were obsessed with a left winger because every window we were constantly going, "There's no one on the left. Every attack is down the right. They can't attack on the left because they keep cutting inside, and they just couldn't see it." I do wonder whether the Ericsson replacement is going to turn into that, where the club don't get it, the fans have a completely different view, and ultimately they just coexist until eventually one comes in the door. I don't know.
Hello, that's funny. Yeah, no, I agree.
So central midfield, as we just kind of discussed, was an area that Spurs did seem to look at in the summer. I think we were linked with a lot of midfielders. I think Mariba from Barcelona obviously went to Leipzig. Ruben Neves, I think Frank Kessié was another name that was linked. Jose Mawar. Is that potentially an area that Spurs might look to revisit in January transfer window?
Maybe. I mean, obviously, we like we say, we have Pape Matar that's going to come in as well next summer. I do wonder whether Harry Winks is the key in all of this. Spurs, I've led to believe that over the summer would have listened to offers had they come in. I think there was interest in him, but no real firm offers. But what I was always told from the people around Harry Winks was that he really wanted to stay and fight for his place. So I do wonder whether you look at the names in there, and obviously Sissoko's gone out the door, but Skip has very much come in as his replacement. I'd probably say in terms of bodies in that midfield, you've got Skip, Højbjerg, you've got Ali now playing there, you've got Ndembele, you've got Lo Celso as well, you've got Pape Matar to come in. I think with Mariba, it was very much a bit like the Sarr deal in that he's just so good that if we can secure him for the future, we will. But unfortunately, kind of other offers that have proved more lucrative or eye-catching. But I just think at the moment with Winks there as well, whether Winks decides next summer, if he has a similar season to last season, or even in January, decides I'm not playing enough Premier League matches, then maybe that changes things. But I just think right now, there's probably not an open spot, which I know will frustrate Spurs fans because, of course, everyone wants another transfer. Of course they do. But right now, with squad limits and things like that, Spurs have finally got all their numbers right in that aspect. And I think it would take a departure to trigger an incoming.
So one player that we did seem quite close to signing this summer was Adama Traore. Obviously, a deal that kind of went on till deadline day. For me, I think he would have actually been quite a good fit for Spurs. I know a lot of people question his end product and his ability to get assists and score goals. But I just feel as though adding that dynamic when you've got players as clinical as Harry Kane and Heung-min Son, for me personally, I thought that would have been a very good signing. And of course, you look at the way that Nuno utilises the wingers as well. For me personally, that would have been a perfect signing for Spurs. But it'll be interesting to just get your take on how close that deal was to happening and whether is that a deal that we might look to revisit in January?
Can I ask, Ali, before you answer that, can you just give us that analogy that you done in your podcast when you described what that's like in terms of, when you described him as when he takes the mask off? I was crying when you did that, right? I was absolutely crying. I think I was literally crying listening to this analogy. You've got to put that in there as well for us, please.
Right. Yeah, what it was, I forgot about that completely. Essentially, it's like when you're watching a horror movie. And there's this kind of killer coming towards with a hood, like the character from Scream, this kind of masked killer. Everyone's fleeing in different directions because it's so scary, this build-up, this suspense, what's happening in front of you. And then suddenly, just when it's the key moment, there's a twist because he pulls back his hood and it's your mate Dave going, "Hey, it's only me, lad." And nothing really came of it. And for me, I know a lot of people won't like that, but for me, that's Adama Traore. I think it's an incredible build-up. I think he absolutely terrifies defenders. There's no denying the guy's got skill, pace, strength. He's got everything. But I don't see, I always hark back to this performance. Spurs Middlesbrough, Ben Davies had him in his back pocket. I think it was a cup game, maybe a Carling Cup game or whatever it was back then. And it might have been Carling. I'm trying to remember who sponsored it back then. It may have even been a Premier League game the year Middlesbrough were up. But Ben Davies had him in his pocket. And while I see him scare defenders, I don't see the end product as massively improved on back then. And for me, I completely agree with it doesn't matter what I think. Nuno adores him. Paratici wanted to sign him for Juventus. I think he put in a bid of more than 50 million to try and get him away from Wolves at one point. And so ultimately, if they wanted him, I absolutely will always 100% behind. They should get who they want because that's what they see fit for the squad. But for me, everything everyone told me about him as the biggest strength was that he'd create space for others. That's a great skill, a talent. Would I pay £50 million for someone who makes space for others? Probably not. And I don't think it ever got to that stage of being close. I think there was certain interest. There were kind of informal talks between the clubs. I'm sure kind of Spurs made it clear what they'd be willing to pay. But, you know, the talk from Wolves is that maybe a bit like we're talking about with Kane, maybe he ends up staying now. Maybe he commits to a new contract and it kind of works in his favour from that point of view. I just felt personally the plan that I was getting told was to bring Traore in, was to free Son up to play up front with Kane. And then we're going to kind of have a bit of a shift in the system. Personally, and this is utter heresy to all the Traore fans out there, I'd have rather had a backup striker. I would have. I think in the winger slots, you've got one of the best person to have on the left in the Premier League, and that's Son. He's there already. I didn't really feel they needed another person there. And what would it have done to Hill? Would it have blocked his path as well as immediately after coming in? I would have rather had another option up front to be able to play. But I get the love for him. I do. He scares me. And there was so many moments watching the Wolves game where I thought, oh, my God, he's actually going to get through. He's got in there. He's got in this position. And I do understand the logic that perhaps with better players around him, maybe he would create things for the likes of Kane and stuff like that. I'd maybe say, and I've got to be honest, I haven't watched too much of Spain as an international side to really fully form an opinion, and people may say this is wrong. I don't know whether has he been an enormous success for Spain, playing with bigger players and enormous talent. So I don't know whether you can judge on that or not. I don't know. Personally, I just don't know. I've seen so many years now, and you look at his assists in the Premier League every single season. And other than one where I think he got 9, which was a couple of seasons ago, just hasn't worked. And sorry, I almost went into another Traore rant there. But I understand it. I understand the love for him. I just don't think he would have been worth 50 million or so that Wolves were looking for.
Yeah, again, it'll be interesting. I know there's reports out that he might be in talks of a new contract with Wolves, so we'll have to keep an eye on that one. Of course, that will come round. I'm just conscious of time, and I'm going to try and squeeze this all in now to the next 5-10 minutes if I can. Because now, I was going to try and squeeze some of this time in for you. You picked up there, Ali, just in terms of Spurs' lack of a second striker. And again, you know, it was only Jason, bless him, that kind of came to the other day and said to me, you know, Bale last season, he contributed 16 goals. Yeah. Vinicius with an extra 10 as well. I mean, that's 26 goals that, you know, we haven't got this season. And, you know, you reported heavily into someone at Spurs, you know, we're trying to bring in, you know, that top-tier striker, you know, the likes of a Vlahovic or Lautaro Martinez. Do you think the club actually got enough to fight on all 4 fronts in a real decent position to do so? When you look at those competitions and what Spurs want to achieve, and you know how much Spurs want to win a trophy, we need to get back in that top 4. When you think that stadium we've got, the training ground we've got, is that realistic to think, you know, with what we've got up front now, we can do that on all 4 fronts?
Right now, yes. But if there's, you know, you're asking a lot again of Kane and Son. You really are. As soon as, if heaven forbid, both of those were out at the same time, it immediately is very threadbare. That's not to say Dane Scarlett has the potential to be an incredible striker. He really does. You know, like I've always said, I'm very fortunate to watch a lot of the youth games, although obviously the pandemic in the last year has kind of almost put a bit of a break in that for a year or so. But ultimately, I've seen very few strikers, kind of young strikers, that really have got as much about them as him. Troy Parrott certainly had a lot about him, and I think for him, he's kind of going through that awkward stage now of having to get to grips with senior football, and we're seeing that he's kind of having a very different education right now, and hopefully he gets back to where I think he could be. But with Dane, he can be terrific, but I also would be worried about stunting his development by having to suddenly throw him into a Premier League atmosphere. I mean, we saw in Pesos, he got his first start, and with service around him being pretty much non-existent, he struggled. And he is, you know, he's not a Harry Kane can create chances for himself. He's incredible, Harry Kane. You know, I do think we sometimes forget he also won the Playmaker Award last year. This is what a weird kind of freak of a striker Spurs have got. He is a playmaker and a striker in one. And so to watch this kind of boy who's only turned 17 a couple of months ago, I do worry about whether Spurs are putting a little bit too much on his shoulders if they are both out injured. Lucas has been mooted as being able to play out there. I've never seen that be a success, really. I don't really like him up there. I think he's better served either in that number 10 or out wide. For me, that was one of the gripes for me of the transfer window. I got the logic behind Nuno and Paratici were very much, if we're going to sign a striker, it's a top one to play up front with Kane. We change that system, we go for two of them. And not only that, but the new striker would be someone where if Harry did want to move on next summer, we've got the long-term replacement there sorted.
Yeah.
I get that. But I still feel there should have been an effort. Carlos Vinicius got mocked a little bit of being this guy who was very much a flat track bully, could take on the clubs in the Europa League, could take on could smash three and celebrate like a madman against non-league Marine. I get all of that. But I also think just having him there, having someone that you could bring on just to hold up the ball and stuff like that. And I do wonder whether against certain teams, if they're threadbare with injuries. I mean, I always think back to Stamford Bridge under Mourinho when they had Stephen Bergwijn up front. Stephen Bergwijn worked his whatever's off. He worked so hard that day, but ultimately didn't mean anything because the ball wasn't sticking. I just feel they're lacking that focal point still. I could be completely wrong, and I hope I am. I hope Dane Scarlett gets minutes in the cups, brings him on, develops him, and suddenly we're like, a bit like with Rashford and we're seeing with Greenwood, suddenly they're saying, I'm ready, because that would be great. But I just feel that was a missed opportunity this window, even if it was just someone on loan, just someone to come in there just for those minutes. And I accept that those players are hard to find. Not everyone wants to come and be the backup mug, the guy in the background who, comes on for his one game every 10th. But yeah, I just feel it's a missed opportunity.
Just to bring it back onto a bit more of the transfer window, and I think we touched on it earlier in terms of the outgoings. Obviously, Spurs reportedly we moved on about 39 million. I think 39 million. 39 million pounds per year. That's right. So that's a lot of money we managed to get off the wage bill. Is that going to have a really big impact? And were you really impressed by how Spurs managed to move players on this summer?
To a degree. I think they got the players out the door they wanted to get out the door. I suppose you could argue if you wanted that the money that came in transfer fees was almost non-existent. It was very like Sissoko 3 million. Alderweireld was roughly 3 million. You're looking at the same kind of figures. I think Foyth was the biggest money coming in. And I'd even say Villarreal underpaid for Foyth because he had a terrific season for them. I think it was probably worth more than that at the end. I think wage structure-wise, yes. They were a lot of the higher earners that... I think that was the key for Spurs. That's always been their problem. It's getting players off the books because they pay them well. We've always whinaged about Spurs not having the wages to attract players. But ironically, they pay their players so well that they then struggle to get them away to other clubs. I mean, Alderweireld had to go to Qatar to get another club. Because no one in Belgium or the Netherlands could match his wages. And it was the same with Sissoko for a while. And Aurier, ultimately, Spurs just had to let him go because no other club was going to come in and offer him the wages. It's got to benefit them. I think what I was always told from Italian journalists, funny enough, was that Paratici, one of his struggles at Juventus was getting players out the door, funnily enough. And it was to do a similar thing. It was the wages were so high that not a lot of other clubs would take. I mean, Aaron Ramsey, what's he on? Something like 400 grand a week or something like that. I think that's just reportedly, but I think that was an issue. So it was intriguing to see how he'd move on players that someone else had brought in. And I'd say he's done it. As I said earlier, I think there's been a refresh of the squad. I think there must be room now in that wage structure going forward. Obviously, very sad to lose Eric Lamela. And, there's I was going to say some tears shed. There weren't really, but you know,
the Spurs community found that loss, Ali. They're still coming to terms with that loss of Lamella.
Yeah, exactly. It was sad to see some of them go. They pretty much all of them contributed something to Tottenham Hotspur. You can't deny that. But I think it was just the right time, and hopefully, it's a new era. It's a Nuno era. I think it's going to be a very different looking Tottenham going forward, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a nice segue into my final question on this topic before we do a quick five on Palace. This I want to ask you is because it kind of ties in with one of the pieces that you most recently wrote, and you said there for you that keeping Kane as well as Son signing a new contract was huge business for the Spurs. Is someone to have done that. Therefore, on that basis, what, taking your Football London hat off here, and as a supporter, which I know is difficult for you to do because, you know, the nature of who you are as a man and, like I say, how you cover the club. From a fan perspective, what's a realistic target for Nuno this season? And as fans, should we be accepting that this is a transitional season? I don't like using that word, but do we have to accept that as an element?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it gets to the point of how, I don't know, Arsenal fans are certainly sick of hearing about transitional seasons. I think Spurs we're probably at a similar kind of point now. It feels like ever since Poch has gone, every year has been a transitional season. I'd say the target should always be what it has been, is to get up into the top four in the cup. I don't see why that should change. I think a lot of other clubs have spent big money, but we know that doesn't always guarantee success. I think you look at someone like Chelsea, who have probably done the best in terms of they had a very specific need, and that was a top striker. And probably sadly for Spurs, they absolutely went out and smashed it and got in Lukaku, a guy that fits everything they need. But I think other than them, you know, there's weaknesses in the others as well. And I think there's a lot to be said. And I feel like I've said his name so many times today, and that's not intentional in any way. But what Poch managed to do with Spurs was to create an atmosphere, a togetherness, a group that kind of was worth more than the money spent elsewhere. And if Nuno can do the same, and the early signs are that's what he's trying to do. If he can do that, there's no reason they can't certainly improve a lot on what they've done in the last couple of seasons. Personally, I'd take fifth or above. I think I would. I think that for me would be enough of progress. It would be better position than the last 2 years, and it would be something to build on. But I think Spurs as a club will still be looking for the top four. And yeah, I mean, it may be the romantic, positive nature that I try and always have. I think they'll push it close for a top four spot. I really do. I think the early signs have been good. Like we say, it's a long season. There's a lot of competitions, and it's going to take its toll on the squad. But we forget how much talent sometimes is in that Tottenham squad. I think because of some of the players like Kane and Son and all that, we haven't bought recently, and there hasn't been that money ploughed in. Doesn't mean to say that they're still not two of the best players in the Premier League. And I think if you've got them leading the line, and you've got Højbjerg, one of the best kind of holding midfielders, or whatever he is, he's kind of become an amalgamation of every midfielder right now. I think Skip's going to only grow. And you've got Italy's best defender, I know it's Argentina, but Serie A's best defender last year is now playing for Spurs. Yep. You've got one of the most gifted players in the Premier League in Doherty. You know, you've got fullbacks that can fly up there. There's a lot to be excited about this Tottenham side. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that because we just wanted more transfers and we wanted more spend and we wanted more than that. And I think sometimes we forget what we've got. Yes, of course, we would have wanted more in the squad. But yeah, I think they could surprise people, Spurs, this season.
We're never going to stop wanting more Here We Golds. We're never going to stop wanting them, Ali. We're always going to ask for them. We are going to finish on Palace, so we're going to go for our final imaginary break of the show. Taking into this break, we've got a wonderful preview from the HLTCO podcast, giving us their thoughts on Palace. When we come back, just a final question to Ali on Palace to come. It's been a quiet international break, so I'm interested to get Ali's thoughts just in terms of what kind of 11, if we can find an 11 to put out for Palace, his thoughts on that. We're going to hand over to Jamie now to talk us through, like I say, Palace and his thoughts.
Yeah, it's obviously an interesting game on Saturday, a 12:30 kickoff, which I think might potentially be a bit of a banana skin, especially away at Crystal Palace. Then, of course, it's already been made a little bit harder by the international break. It obviously looks like we may have lost Oliver Skipp. I think that's one we're waiting to see on. Steven Bergwijn, potentially a bit of worry over him, Sessegnon, and then, of course, you've got the three guys coming back from South America with Sanchez, Romero and Lo Celso all missing the game because they're having a quarantine. So kind of how do you see Spurs lining up on the weekend against Palace? It'd be interesting to get your take on that.
Yeah, it's a tough one. Only Spurs could come out of an international break with 3 players stuck abroad in Croatia, 1 player reporting stiffness in his groin. It's the weirdest.
So weird saying that, isn't it? So bizarre saying that.
And obviously, it's so dependent on how serious some of those injuries are. I mean, Son. I've been speaking to Korean correspondents out there, and they're saying there's some of them saying that they've heard maybe 10 days, and then some of them are saying it was purely precautionary, and that's all it was, just to make sure he didn't actually create an injury out of just a feeling, as it were. So we kind of have to wait till he reports back. We've got Nuno's press conference on Friday. Skippy, I mean, Lee Carsley seemed to indicate he kind of played it down. He didn't seem to try and think it was too bad. But I do wonder whether we'll see Harry Winks come in, which will upset all the people that have decided Harry Winks is the new Antichrist and he's the worst player to ever pull on a Tottenham shirt. But what I always say, Harry Winks is more than capable of playing very well against Crystal Palace in the Premier League. He really is. I think the criticism of him has kind of got to silly levels now, and people forget about some of the terrific performances he's put in over the years against the biggest clubs in Europe. He's quite capable of playing against Palace. And then it's the key thing is going to be the defence, really. It's where he goes with it. Joe Rodon, I didn't actually see whether, I know he wasn't starting for Wales. I don't know if he got minutes or not for them in the end tonight. That probably was key to him. If he did, then maybe that puts him in a position to be able to start. Yep. If not, I wonder whether to keep Tanganga and the new signing happy, you have Emerson on the right, with Tanganga pushing inside.
I think by Jamie's shake of the head there, it looks like there was no minutes for Rodon.
Yeah, I've just checked. He didn't come off the bench tonight, so.
Yeah.
No. Yeah, so that's not a great sign for him. I don't think that really puts him in a terrific position. I don't know what kind of fitness work he's been doing this week, but I personally would be, he's a good defender, very good young defender, but I'd be worried about throwing him in there out of place to Selhurst Park. Let's be honest, it's always a tight game there. The crowd are back and they are always noisy for this game as well. It's pretty much always either 1-0 or 1-1. It's always pretty much the same result. I'd probably go with Tanganga, but that's the worry. It's going to be very much a makeshift defence when it's actually been a really settled defence thus far. That would worry me a bit. And then, obviously we've seen Harry Kane score a terrific goal, so he's now back in the flow, as it were.
Do you still think, Ali, on Tanganga, for you, can he still play as a centre-back? I've heard you say so often on your shows, on the YouTube, on the podcast, you've often championed the fact that there's no reason why Tanganga, in your opinion, could one day not become a centre-back. Are you still surprised that nobody's really had that opportunity to give him as a centre-back at the moment? And maybe that could happen this weekend, of course.
Well, I said I spoke to him just before the season started, and I asked him, I said, where do you want to play? He said, centre-back. He didn't make any kind of bones about it. He said, that's where I want to play. I'm a centre-back.
Yeah.
And I just think the fact that he's been so good at right back has probably made Nuno think, well, no, he is pretty good in that role. I'm trying to think if he played. I think he played a couple of the pre-season games, maybe at centre back. I think for me, it's probably the safest thing. I think he's putting him there, maybe over the road to not being too fit right now. It's a big old debut for Emerson, the London derby. In front of a potentially hostile crowd as well. Yeah. But, Nuno have had it all planned. I suppose you could argue that back four Reguilon aside until the last couple of days, he's been able to work with them all this week. So he will have been able to drill them and work with them. I'd be shocked if that's not the back four now, especially if Rodon hasn't got those minutes. But you never know, Tottenham. They might just spring a surprise suddenly out somewhere. We know it can't be Sanchez and Romero. We know that. Unless they find some incredible loophole that no one knew existed in the UK's coronavirus restrictions. But it's not the game you really want to be experimenting in.
Yeah, it's customary that we have to ask you for a prediction.
Oh my goodness!
I know you don't like doing predictions.
on the weight of history, I'll go with 1-0 to Spurs. But it's going to be a tough game.
Okay, fine. And before I tee up a final question for Ali to leave it on, which I think he'll enjoy this one. Jamie, what's your prediction?
I'm going to go for 2-1. I think it's going to be difficult to. I think it's difficult to see us keeping another clean sheet. I think that's been so impressive in terms of the way that we've improved so much defensively. And actually, Eric Dyer, I think he really has seemed to be that leader in the back line. So I think having him will be really big for Spurs. But it is going to be such a tough game. You know, I said 12:30 kickoff after the back of an international break. So it'll be a tough match, but I do think Spurs can win 2-1. So,
I agree with you, Jamie. I think it will be tough. I'm going to go for 2-1. Ali, a last question to end the show, and it's been a great show. It's been such a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for giving us so much of your time. This is from Lily White Glover, who says, if City came in for Ali, offering to triple his wages, would Ali move to football.manchester?
Well, I do have a gentleman's agreement with my boss that if that ever happens, no, I absolutely would not. No, I love covering Spurs. I do. They absolutely cause me so much stress and pain enough of the time, but they also bring me plenty of joy and terrific moments. And no, I couldn't imagine covering another club right now. It's as I said earlier, always an adventure. It really is.
I must say, though, if you were to go to football.manchester, you might actually get a day off and an actual day off. You actually might get that day off that you wanted.
I would actually. It's our sister paper. It's the Manchester Evening News that cover Man City. They're within our company, and they do a good enough job. They don't need me covering them. I can stick to Spurs.
Oh, and we couldn't do without you. So thank you ever so much for all your time, Ali. For anyone that doesn't know where you are, and if you don't know where Ali is, then where are you? I mean, where have you been? Obviously, Ali, tell us where we can find you. YouTube, podcast. Tell us where we can find your incredible content.
I do seem to be everywhere at the moment. Much to the kind of frustration probably of my family. Football London, obviously, you can find my stuff I write. Obviously, have the YouTube channel, just Alasdair Gold on there, and we've now got Golden Guest Talk Tottenham, our own podcast, which launched about episode 6 or 7 we're into now. Guesty and I have a good laugh together, and hopefully that comes across in there. And that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of all over the place.
Yeah. I mean, Jamie, we always say this, always great to have Ali on. It's always fantastic to have him on. And like I say, we try and grab him once every 6 months to see what's going on. And Spurs change so much in those 6 months. Always great to have him on, though, isn't it, Jamie?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Spurs fans are very, very lucky to have Alasdair as a reporter. I know, obviously, in the comments as well, that's definitely been reflected as well. So, really, really good to have him on the show. So,
I must say a massive thank you. But I say, bearing in mind it's an international night, to have nearly, 500 watching us live is quite unbelievable. 500 watching us live, and God, thank you so much for all the support. I must say a wonderful thank you to Jamie from the Daily Hotspur, and Ali. Thank you so much as always. Keep fighting the good fight for us, and we're looking forward to much more Here We Go throughout the season. Fingers crossed.
Thanks. It's been an absolute pleasure, lads. Honestly, really enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It's been great.
You're a diamond. Guys, most importantly as always, keep safe, keep well. Come on, you Spurs.